You're not cheating on your wife if you eat my lemon square.
Your lemon squares taste like ass.
And welcome back to Horror Queers. We're doing another hangout, and this month we are talking with Katie Rife, a good friend of the pod. We've obviously had her on before, but we're getting into some interesting topics as we're talking about good for her horror. And Katie, we're going to put you in the hot seat first. I wonder if you can tell us, how will you define this topic? Like, what is good for her horror for you?
It's an amazing question, actually, because I feel like good for her horror overlaps several different genres, but it's kind of none of them at the same time. Like I would not qualify like a rape revenge film as good for her horror, because it is usually a her and she is, getting revenge, but still not good for her. That's bad. It's bad stuff happened. Like it is, but it is a revenge based genre in a lot of ways. I feel like it's basically like a horror movie where the horror and also the catharsis comes from seeing a woman get back at people that are treating her like shit, basically.
So I think, because doing research for this, I feel like the phrase "good for her horror" is kind of relatively new in use.
I think so too.
But you're right. I feel like even just kind of looking at what people thought, a lot of them that pull up are either rape revenge films, or just in general, like women doing something against a man that has wronged them. But I am interested to see. So I don't necessarily disagree with you when you say I wouldn't consider it rape revenge, but pulling back just from like base subject. So, we could say rape revenge, man wrongs woman, woman gets revenge. So even something for me like Ready or Not, I think you classify as good for her horror, because it's like, but again, at its base level, woman is wronged by man, woman gets revenge on man. So what is it do you think about that pulls rape revenge out of it? Is it just because rape as a subject is much more gross, nasty, horrific than just a simple betrayal of sorts?
I honestly, for me, I think it is because depicting the rape itself is a big part of that genre. Like, it's part of the movie, and and I don't know, like, for some reason that takes it out of it for me. For some reason that takes it out of it for me. Like, I don't have an academic reason why, but the
it's appealing.
That kind of like puts it in a different category for me. Maybe in a more visceral category, one that's more about like disgust and catharsis, more so than like kind of a smug feeling of like, get it, bitch. They're kind of two different feelings.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I feel like one that people are naturally going to gravitate to is something like Promising Young Woman, which in a way is a secret rape revenge film, but we're not seeing the woman who was assaulted gain that revenge. So it's like, it's kind of delicately balancing both of those, but obviously the construction of the film is based on the idea that you do think she is the wrong woman, or the wronged woman, rather.
Yeah, or she's like representing all wronged women everywhere in a way.
Yeah. But I mean, at the same time, I feel like, you ask someone this, like, something like I Spit in Your Grave will come up, because it's like, oh, good for her. But again, it's just like, that is such a brutal thing where it's like, I almost feel like too, saying good for her, it's like you're also saying, maybe not, but like good for her because she got raped, so she had the reason to go after all these horrible men and kill them. So it's a kind of into this murky gray area of like, why am I saying good for her at this particular moment?
Exactly. Thank you. You articulated that so well. That's exactly how I feel. It's like, I can't say good for her in a movie where a woman gets raped. Like, that's not good.
Yeah.
That's bad for her.
Let's think of, so what are some non-rape? So let's just go out of that subgenre, and let's just like, what are some good for her horror films for you? Because I got to say, one of my absolute favorite ones is Tarantino's Death Proof. Like, that to me is a very ultimate form of good for her horror. But at the same time, we're watching like a bunch of girls get brutally murdered, and then the next set of girls essentially get revenge for all women that this man has killed.
Yeah, that's a really interesting. I honestly think Midsommar is the ultimate good for her movie. I will give Ari Aster like credit for that. I think it is like, it's not the first example of the genre, but I think it is kind of the ultimate good for her movie, because this guy like discounts her and treats her like shit throughout the movie and kind of thinks that he can push her aside, and he cannot. Good for her.
That's so fascinating to me, though, because I feel like the first time I heard Good for Her Horror was actually shortly after Midsummer came out, and people were doing all those memes that were just like, screenshots of like the girls in these movies, but Midsummer was like the big one. But I've also seen in the past couple of years some people turn against Midsummer and be like, this is not good for horror. Like, this is not like,
oh really?
Yeah, but I mean, not like a widespread thing, but I've seen people like clap back at that. And it really just depends on, I guess, really how you view her and that guy's work. Because some people were like, well, he tried for her. And I'm kind of like, did he?
Well, I think it's also problematized because a lot of people then started to say, well, technically Christian is also sexually assaulted in that film, right? Because he's drugged and then raped, and his comeuppance is to be then burned alive in a bear suit. So I think some people are like, well, this doesn't feel maybe as satisfying as it should, because he's actually also a victim of that film.
Sure. Yeah. No, I wouldn't argue with the argument that Christian is sexually assaulted in the movie. I would not,
I just don't think it discounts Danny's revenge.
It's not like that.
Yeah, like it's totally separate. Like, I guess it'd be different if Danny raped him, and then it's kind of like, okay, like maybe like that's getting a bit more murky. But his sexual assault isn't related to Danny's choice at the end of the film. That is completely like between the two of them and like this little bubble they're in.
Yeah, it's just that it's a more complex story. There's some complexity, there's some layers to the story, and a lot of appreciating and talking about horror is about like holding together all of these elements, some of which can be like problematic and uncomfortable and contradictory because it's dark subject matter.
Well, but that's the thing, right? Nuance. And Joe and I talk about this all the time, where it's like, it's not so easy to just say yes, no, black, white, right, wrong. There's more layers to it. And I think in a genre like horror specifically, it's harder for some people to do that because we are dealing with such upsetting and disturbing subject matter.
Yeah, people definitely look for straightforward resolutions for like traumatic things because that's something that people don't get in real life, right? And so you want to see that in a movie to give you an experience that you're probably not going to get.
So is that then
very messy?
So is that then the appeal of something like Good for Her Horror? Because Trace, you noted that it feels like this is a relatively new phenomenon. I think we can probably all agree that there's a real world linkage to something like the Me Too movement, where women are like, hey, we're basically fucking sick and tired of being treated this way. And then we start to develop memes to accurately capture like, well, if you're looking for catharsis, you could watch this movie and it's going to give you, even though it's not real life, that little sliver of satisfaction. Like, even if you can't get this in real life, you're going to get this from this film, that you're going to feel better.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. And the more we're talking about it, I'm wondering if maybe the idea of Good for Her Horror is like, it's not that like those type of stories aren't new, because it is another edge case because the main character is so like profoundly traumatized in the movie that like you're kind of like, good for her. But the witch that came from the sea, if you've ever seen that one from the 70s, that's another one that I would kind of put in this bucket. And it is a revenge story, but the main character, I'm not going to say what happened to her, but like some really upsetting abuse stuff happened to her in her life. And she grows up to basically be a serial killer who castrates men and is like really, and you're kind of like, good for her, but also,
Actually, no, but that because I think a good example of something that I've seen described as good her horror is the witch, because that could be even though it's a young girl like aligning herself with Satan, it also doubles as kind of like blossoming into womanhood, like taking control of her life against her repressive family. And so I can definitely see that ending as being a very happy ending for people.
Yeah, like I don't know, man. I don't know. For me, I love the kind of like playing with the Christian imagery because I was raised Christian.
Yeah.
And so, you know, and if you're raised Christian and end up kind of walking away from it, I don't hail Satan, you know?
Yeah.
Like, it's just kind of a natural thing to do. Like if I had to make the choice Thomason made in that movie, you bet I would go with Satan. Are you kidding?
Yeah, there's something else to do in that town.
Like, beat you and call you bad. Like he's like, you're great. You're doing great. Do you want some butter?
Yeah.
Like, and her mom and her dad treat her like absolute shit. Like,
and they're exiled from the village. Like she can't go anywhere.
Yeah, I would 100% go with Satan. Yeah, the Witch I think is probably one of the more straightforward, good for her horror movies that we're talking about, because it is like, you know, a reasonable person would make the choice that she makes in that movie.
Yes. I mean, before we logged on, I even mentioned, like, I think one of the earliest examples I can think of is Carrie. Like, Carrie is very much an example of good for her horror.
Yes, absolutely. So, yeah, I'm wondering if, like, maybe we're not talking about new subject matter because, I mean, obviously misogyny is not new.
No.
And people wanting catharsis and revenge in storytelling is not new. But maybe it's just the way that we interpret it in like the Me Too kind of like, you know, and alongside Me Too was kind of a rise in like feminist discussion about horror movies, just the opening up of like discussing, you know, broader social justice issues in horror. It kind of opened up around the same time in the late 2010s. And I wonder if maybe this is just like a movement reacting to existing tropes.
Yes.
And not behaving with the horror. You know, you're supposed to see Carrie and be like, oh my God, that's so horrible. I can't believe she did that. But like, if you flip the script, then it becomes good for her. And I wonder if maybe that's what we're seeing here.
Well, go ahead, Joe.
Well, I was going to say, I feel like this is also where I see a lot of intersectionality with queer horror, right? Because it is often women, but it's, you know, women who have not just maybe experienced something like misogyny, but also women who are deviating from the norm in terms of like gender roles, gender presentation, sexual orientation, and so on. Like, I've been intrigued to see something like Jennifer's Body, where people are saying, oh, I align myself with Jennifer, even though she is obviously a horrible villain, but what she's doing to these boys is so satisfactory. But then you also have a sort of counterpoint in Needy, who is also a sort of good for her figure, especially at the end when she's like fucking kicking nurses and breaking out of the mental institution.
Well, then she goes and kills all those boys.
Yes, enjoyably.
Well, I think actually too, so I mean, especially in post Me Too, I mean, obviously we've had female directed horror before, but I think we're starting to see more of these films told from a female perspective. So I mean, even though I'm dipping back into rape revenge here, something like Revenge is something that we're saying like, yeah, let's get good for her horror, but told from a female perspective, told from a female gaze. And so we're seeing that shift in the way these stories are told now.
Yeah, I'd say Violation as well.
Oh yeah. But I think Jennifer's Body is a really great example of that because, you know, when you hear Karin Kasama talk about that movie and Diablo Cody, they were deliberately kind of like, you know, it's something I think about Jennifer's Body sometimes similarly to the Slumber Party Massacre, but no one came in and said more tits.
No one fucked it up.
Yes.
Like, those movies are kind of sisters in that way. Jennifer's Body was allowed to be itself, but she clearly had to put some moments in there of Megan Fox looking sexy, but it's not to the extreme of the Slumber Party Massacre.
Well,
but those movies are kind of sisters in my mind.
No, yeah. Well, I mean, actually, even did you see the Slumber Party Massacre remake?
Yes, I did.
Like that again, female directed, female written, and no sexual assault, thank God. But like that's very much I'm getting revenge for the attack you did on my mother all these years ago. Like that to me is great as well.
Yeah. So I mean, it opens it up. Like I do think it's really interesting to me, good for her. I think it might just be a vibe, because like when you look at like the letter of all this stuff, is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre good for her horror because Sally makes it out, you know? She's getting
That's a tricky
revenge on
one.
these guys that killed her family,
Well,
or her friends, excuse me.
But that's the thing, though, right? So like, technically, you could even say any final girl like that survives a movie is good for her horror, unless we're saying good for horror specifically women taking action against men, as opposed to just a killer or a villain of some sort, you know?
Yeah, like a family of killers. And does it have to be like specifically a gender-based wrong that is done to her? Yeah.
Because that's why I think something like Carrie is really interesting, because there's obviously like a gendered attack in terms of like the way that everybody sort of goes after her. Thank you, Billy and Chris, go after her. But there's also something so satisfying about watching Carrie take out Chris, right? It's not just like, oh, we want to see John Travolta pay. It's also like, we want to see Chris as the mean girl head bitch get that comeuppance, right?
Yeah. Well, okay, I'm going to do a bit of a deep cut from recently, but did y'all ever see the movie Hunter x Hunter starring Devon Sawa?
Oh, yeah.
So,
that's really good, Katie.
Okay, I'm gonna
watch it.
Basically, something horrible happens to a family in this movie, and the mother has to take it upon herself to go after the killer, played by Nick Stahl. And the final 10 minutes of this movie is one of the goriest and most brutal comeuppances I've ever seen in a single film in my entire life.
It is hardcore. Like, it was such a talking point for a hot moment.
Yes.
More than Violation?
I would say
it's maybe on par, but in a different vein.
Yes. It's not sexual based, but it's definitely a revenge against a violent act. But it's not gender based. It's less gender based and more matriarch based. It's like your position in the family. Like Mama Bear is upset that something happened to her family, so she's getting revenge on that.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I we're talking about a good for her, and I said that these movies are about women, but would you think a good for him movie would have to be inherently queer because of the like power dynamics?
That's a stumper.
I don't want to say yes, because I feel like I don't want to generalize that, because I don't know, because but I'm trying to rack my brain for like, okay, what is an example I could think of good for him horror that isn't queer?
What about something like
hypothetically?
Old Boy.
Is that good for him?
Is it?
I don't know. I mean, it's also like terrible, absolutely fucking terrible things happen to this character, but he does get his revenge on this attacker.
But again, are we making good for her just generalized revenge, you know? I don't know.
Well, because like think about Final Boys. We think of Final Boys. And so let's remove Jesse from Nightmare, because obviously that's kind of steeped in queerness. But Ash, from Ash versus Evil Dead. But again, like I don't feel like the good for Ash. I don't feel like that in that movie the same way I would about the films we've been discussing for good for her. So I can't.
Though I wonder, is it because now we're intersecting with comedy? Like, I feel like it's, there almost is something. It's like there has to be trauma and there has to be revenge.
Well, and I would argue that it would be really difficult, if not impossible, to have a straight male good for him moment because of the power dynamics. There's something about a good for her where it's a less powerful person getting one over on a more powerful person, right?
Well,
and then straight guys are kind of coming in on top, and so who is there for them to bring them down that they have to then get over?
Well, then it really depends, I think, on just like the socio-political status of people. So like if we lived in if in 50 years the world shifts and straight white men are discriminated against.
Let's all have a good laugh at that.
No one isolate that and give that to Fox News.
But
they
like,
are delusional enough already.
yes, but like
Facing the world.
hypothetically, if that was the case and that's the world we were living in, then yeah, I guess maybe we would feel that way about these type if that was in a movie. But that's obviously not not going to happen, and probably never will happen. Like obviously,
not the way
good for
things are
him
going,
starring Tucker Carlson.
The world would really have to change for Tucker Carlson to be a disempowered figure.
My God,
like,
right?
A lot. The world would have to change a lot.
But I mean, I don't know. I mean, like, I'm trying to think. Even like recently, I mean, the ones I pulled Hard Candy. I pulled for one as good for her horror. Teeth, which I think dips into rape revenge a bit, but then The Woman, but again, that is also rape revenge. Colossal's one I pulled up though with Anne Hathaway and Jason Sudeikis.
Oh, Colossal's a really good example. Yeah, maybe for me the line between like rape revenge and good for her is that good for her is really more kind of like everyday shit, you know, to bring it back to Midsommar, like your boyfriend being kind of shitty and dismissive to you is an everyday sort of betrayal. It's not like this, you know, this horribly traumatic event. It's more like microaggressions.
Yes. Oh, I was about to say microaggressions. Yes, it's perfect.
Yeah. And Colossal, like, you know, that's the same kind of thing where Jason Sudeikis's character, that movie, like if someone was like, what's this nice guy syndrome, you just show him Colossal.
Yeah.
The movie did a very good job capturing that, I felt.
So I think I found, as you both were talking, I was thinking, okay, how about Get Out as an example of good for him?
Oh,
yeah. Well, that brings race into it, which is another way that people are disempowered, right? Yeah.
Because like when I saw Get Out, like when he gets rid of Allison Williams' character, my theater like fully erupted. Like they were 100%. So eager to watch her die.
100%. Yeah. And and then the scene later on with like the operating room in the basement, like everybody when he gets out of that house, everybody in my audience was going crazy.
Okay, so
that's a good for him movie.
Good for blank horror. We're really looking at any kind of disenfranchised, marginalized group, because I think it's really we are hard pressed to find a good for him horror movie about a white man.
Yeah, I almost don't want to open that up to comment to be like, hey, prove us wrong, like give us examples. I'm like,
I know, don't do that. Don't Google.
I don't care to know.
Wait, I'm sorry. Could you imagine? Just Google like straight cisgender white man good for him horror movies revenge. It's like, God.
Oh God. I don't want to live in that world. I don't think.
Never.
Yeah, no. I think we can just say that good for them horror, you know, we'll make it gender neutral.
Right.
It's a story about somebody who is in a disempowered, disenfranchised place, getting one over and getting free of the forces that are holding them down.
Yeah, I think you're right. It could be a specific incident, but I think what we're seeing more of is it is like the outside forces, as opposed to just like one specific person just doing something against this person. If that makes any sense.
I mean, I'm okay with not considering rape revenge and good for them to be two different things. Yeah. I'm okay being in the minority on that because I can conceive how it would be. I can conceive how you would, see it that way. It's just for me, the vibe is different. I'm floating on vibes, y'all. Like,
fair enough.
Fair enough.
I mean, I do think if we had someone who was talking about like, I identify as a sexual assault survivor, there might be something incredibly cathartic about seeing someone in that position getting revenge, getting bloody murder, and so on. But I think maybe,
and that is about power, like that's a situation that's 100% about power. So,
yeah. But I think it's also, I think you're right, Katie, like it is almost an individualized response, because I know some people who are just like, I don't ever want to see another rape revenge film. Like I care not to see it on my screen. Yeah. I'm good without it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I have my own personal guidelines for those type of films.
I mean,
everybody does.
it's case by case and it's person by person. That's how that's how a lot of horror is. I'm sorry, that's how art is.
bigger and broader. Yep.
Okay. Well, I mean, do we have anything else to really add to this subject? I feel like we've really kind of like parsed through this.
Yeah, you said bring recommendations.
Oh,
Mine
yeah.
was The Witch. Mine, I've mentioned it before, is The Witch That Came from the Sea. That's from the 70s.
Yeah, I'm that down.
It was on Criterion Channel for a while. Do you remember like last fall or the fall before? I forget which one. They had that really nice like 70s horror package on Criterion Channel. It was in that. So maybe look for that and then go from there. It's probably not on Criterion Channel anymore, but if you follow that,
I'll find it.
Yeah.
It's out there.
So what's your guys' recommend? What's good for her, good for them movies that you like?
I mean, like my main one, like, my main two I was coming in here with were Death Proof and Colossal. Like those were the two that I was like, with again a bit of hard candy, because you know who doesn't want to watch a teenage girl kill a pedophile?
Yeah, who doesn't? Truly, I would like to see it.
Yeah.
Speaking of memes.
But Joe, what did you come in with?
Yeah, I mean, this is interesting because I've been curating topics based on a future limited series podcast that the Anatomy of a Scream Pod Squad is doing. So it's in part, I was like, oh, let's have this conversation because I'm hearing a bunch of like female podcast creators in my ears talking about them. But yeah, it was some of the more, I think, common contemporary ones like Jennifer's Body, Violation. I think All Cheerleaders Die is an interesting pick because I feel like we lose a lot of the girls in that movie. So I feel like there's a tension there. And then Katie, maybe not to explode, but I'd love just to get your like quick reaction. I felt like a controversial pick could be Elle.
Oh.
Talk about nuance.
Yeah, no kidding. Oh my God. My Elle story, real quick, is that I went to go see it, just at like a landmark theater in Chicago. And the theater was empty except for me and this older French couple. And after the movie, the lady yelled at the man in French for so long. It was all the way out to the parking lot. I don't speak French, but I could tell she was mad that he brought her. And I'm sitting there being like, I thought it was very complex. I kind of liked it,
Yeah, it was like.
Well, I mean, it would be a good for her. I mean, it's very continental and French and everything point of view. I feel like there's something very French specifically about taking the thing that people used to hold you down and turning it into kind of making it sexual. There's something very French about that.
Yeah, it's like taking ownership of it.
Well, right.
It's more good for her.
it's I think for me it's more so she feels empowered by this, even though the way she gets empowered by it is not necessarily the way I would go. I wouldn't agree to do that.
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and say it's icky.
So it's like just again pulling myself back, just basic thing. She is empowered just by a very weird way.
Yes.
She overcomes an oppressive force in her own fucked up way. Yeah.
Also, by the way, the Witch That Came from the Sea, still on Shudder, but also on Tubi, everyone. So
hey, there we go. Okay.
Hey.
Okay, so that's your big recommendation. Everybody has to go and watch that.
I want to watch it.
Okay, well, Katie, if people wanted to engage with you after watching The Witch That Came in from the Sea, how would they get a hold of you?
Yell at me, maybe. It's really dark, you guys. Just
okay. warning, everybody.
Warning.
It's really dark. But like, if this is a crowd that's seen Violation, I think y'all can handle it.
Yeah.
Jesus.
It's in that same kind of sandbox zone. So
good for her.
But I'm on Twitter. That's the best place to get in touch with me. It's at Rife with Katie. That's the only social media platform I use consistently. And now I'm freelance, writing for a whole bunch of places. I ran a series on Fangoria for Pride Month that I'm very proud of. So go and check that out. It's an extended history of the Carmilla figure in
we are familiar with Carmilla.
Yes. That book came out 150 years ago this year.
Yeah. Oh man.
Wild.
Isn't that wild? She was the first lesbian vampire, so 150 years of lesbian vampires.
Predates Dracula too, right?
It does.
Yeah, by about 20 years. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And there's two characters in Carmilla that he basically combined to make Van Helsing,
mm-hmm.
which is pretty interesting. And there, like, I don't know, vampire stuff is so interesting to me because, like, there is some folklore about it, but the folklore is so different from, like, you know, the rules that we think of.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of that was the invention of Bram Stoker specifically, and also all the movies that were vampire movies came up with a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
A lot of it doesn't, like, you know, if you go back to, like, I don't know, Romanian
like
myths
folklore
or whatever. Yeah, there's nothing about garlic or mirrors or anything like that in those stories.
The movies love to twist things around.
What's a good weapon against a vampire? I don't know. Garlic? Yeah, throw that in there.
It smells strong, right? Throw Jesus in there. I'm sure they don't like Jesus very much.
Oh man.
Oh my God. Well, Katie, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. This was an interesting topic to do. I think one of our more interesting ones, Joe, because again, it's just like it's still kind of a genre or subject of film that's still being defined, kind of.
Yes.
Yeah. And I love the idea that right, like, as we were talking about it, we came in good for her, but I feel very strong we should come out good for them, because there are other you know, intersectional ways that people can be disempowered and get very righteous, satisfying revenge in a horror movie.
Yes,
there we go.
Put that out there for all the screenwriters.
That's what we want to see more of in the future.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, that'll wrap up another Horror Queers hangout. Katie, thanks again, and we will talk to you soon.
So pleased. You guys are the best. I'm so happy.